Was specifically mentioned in this last hearing. Jim Griffin said, and I'll quote him, "The DNA we're talking about came from Maggie Murdaugh's left fingernail that was tested by SLED." That's the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. The DNA sample that we're asking to be sampled, it positively was not Alec Murdaugh's. It's 11 times more an unknown male.
Alec Murdaugh is coming back to a courtroom, and this time, a speck of DNA smaller than a grain of salt might decide everything. I need to be honest with you before we go any further. For years, this case felt closed. Convicted, sentenced, done. But the Retrial hearings happening right now are surfacing a detail the first trial barely touched, and it changes how every piece of evidence in this case has to be read. Here is what we know. In June of 2021, Maggie and Paul Murdaugh were shot to death at the family's hunting property in Colleton County, South Carolina. Alec Murdaugh, husband and father, was convicted of both murders in 2023. That conviction was overturned this year after the South Carolina Supreme Court found that a court clerk had improperly influenced jurors during deliberations.
He's getting a new trial, folks, in 2027, and I think things are going to be different. I have egg on my face from the last case because I said, ain't no way this Becky Hill business is going to stand. They're going to call a mistrial. They didn't. And he was convicted.
So she explained she had a financial incentive for a guilty verdict. She also made comments to her like, don't be fooled by the evidence presented by Mr. Murdaugh's lawyer. Watch him closely. Just before he testifies, look at his actions, look at his movements.
And it went to the Supreme Court, and they decided, yeah, it was a bad thing that Becky Hill did these things with these jurors, and that conviction shouldn't stand. So he's getting a retrial.
A new trial is now set for April 2027. This is not a rehash of an old case. This is a fresh legal proceeding starting almost from zero, and that means every piece of physical evidence gets a second look, this time with better tools than existed in 2021. That second look starts with what was found under Maggie Murdaugh's left fingernail.
What I think we're going to see in trial number 2 is DNA underneath Maggie Murdaugh's finger. In the first trial, there was a little bit, made of that unknown male DNA, but years and years later, we're better at determining DNA. Even if it's teeny tiny, like Koberger status, right? This almost imperceivable tiny speck of DNA underneath the knife sheath, well, they got a whole profile built out of that. And that seems to be maybe where Alec Murdaugh's lawyers are going now. That little tiny speck of unknown male DNA, they don't want it to be just unknown male DNA. They want it to be known. Who is it? Because if it's somebody who matters, who's weird or strange or a potential killer, that could be the whole ball of wax.
At the time of the original investigation, forensic analysts recovered unidentified male DNA from that fingernail. It was tested. It did not match Alec Murdaugh. It did not match the other individuals swabbed during the investigation. In the first trial, this detail was mentioned and then largely set aside. It was treated as background noise in a case built on financial motive and circumstantial timeline. But defense attorneys are now asking the court to run that sample through modern genealogical testing, the same kind of testing that helped identify the suspect in the University of Idaho murders.
Here's how it played out in the pretrial hearing.
These murders happened in 2021. We're in 2026. 2021, there's no such thing as artificial intelligence. In 2021, this genealogy was just on the ground floor. In 2026, we are light years ahead. And so what we're asking for didn't really exist in 2021. It does exist today, and Othram is the leading lab that performs this analysis. They did last year, in 2024, the statistics are that they cleared 200 cold cases on behalf of law enforcement around the United States and the country. They work with law enforcement every day. The most high-profile case they did was at the University of Idaho, the Moscow, Idaho murders. That's how they solved the Moscow murder cases, was through Othram Lab.
That case sat cold until investigators built a family tree outward from crime scene DNA, matching genetic markers to relatives of an unknown suspect until one name emerged. That is the tool now being pointed at the unidentified DNA under Maggie Murdaugh's nail. Here is why that timing matters. In 2021, this kind of testing barely existed outside a handful of specialized labs. By 2026, it has helped close roughly 200 cold cases nationwide. The sample was there the entire time. The science to read it properly was not. Now it is. Let's walk through what the defense is actually arguing, because it deserves to be laid out fully. There was a shell casing recovered beneath Maggie Murdaugh's body, meaning whoever fired that shot was standing close. Her cell phone was missing from the scene and has never been recovered.
I do want to address this red herring argument. The DNA that we're talking about, Your Honor, came from Maggie Murdaugh's left fingernails. That was tested by SLED with this STR analysis. The DNA sample number 70 that we're asking to be tested, it positively was not Alec Murdaugh's. Any of the other folks who they took buccal swabs from went through a long list, not them, except for one potential, and that potential, the ultimate result was it's 11 times more an unknown male, so they know it's a male, than it was this person. That's how they do things in their DNA analysis. And Mr. Waters said, well, there's no evidence of struggle, but there was a shell casing under Maggie Murdaugh's body from the gun that killed her. I mean, that shell casing and that gun had to be in very close proximity. Maggie Murdaugh's cell phone was missing from the crime scene. Was DNA transferred at that point in time?
And under her fingernail sat DNA belonging to a man who was never identified. Taken together, the defense argues this points toward the possibility of a third person present that night, someone whose identity has never been established.
On making sure that we can maybe find out who that DNA is before we end up in another trial that just points to Alec Murdaugh.
Yeah, I think the judge's words were, I'm not saying no. So she hasn't fully allowed them to go do all this and make sure they're going to run down this as potentially a third-party defendant. But I think that she is going to allow them to at least try to do the testing if there is enough there for them to do the testing that they want. And I think that, you know, like Jim Griffin argued, things are very different in 2026 than they were in 2021. They already know it's not Alec Murdaugh, so it's not like they have a lot of fear it's going to come back and be bad for them. Almost anybody it comes back for, they can make some kind of argument. I mean, let's see, it's Buster's. Well, that's her son. That's who she's with. She was probably hugging him and, you know, the day before. So why wouldn't his DNA be there? Or is that going to be a third-party defendant now for them? They're going to say, well, maybe it was Buster, you know, whatever.
The prosecution has pushed back hard, calling the fingernail DNA a red herring, pointing out there were no defensive wounds and no visible signs of a struggle. The judge did not dismiss the request. She ordered the defense to explain how long testing would take and whether a viable sample even exists. That is not a door closing. That is a door being left open just wide enough to walk through.
Okay, I haven't said no. This is what I do want you to do, though, Mr. Griffin. I want to know how long it's going to take to analyze what it is that you're asking for. And even if I expedite it, I'd like to know how long it's going to take. And I'd also like to know if there's even a viable sample that they can get. And we will discuss this at our next pretrial.
Now here is the argument working against the defense, and it is a serious one. Alec Murdaugh had access to that property. He had motive tied to a mounting financial collapse, misappropriated settlement funds, and looming reckoning with his law firm. He lied to investigators about his whereabouts in the moments before the murders, a lie that was only unraveled by cell phone and vehicle data, placing him near the kennels minutes before the shooting.
Yeah, I think that this is definitely not as open and shut of a case as some people feel because he got convicted the first time. I think there were definite holes in the case, like the motive. I never bought the financial motive either. Wow. Now, the issue is the big lie, the Snapchat. He was right there, potentially last one with them. He definitely had the opportunity to commit this crime. He was the #1 person with the opportunity to commit this crime, driving to his mom's house, acting weird, doing things with the worker with his mom was there, and she testified to, you know, it was off, something was weird. So I definitely think there's some stuff there, right? And why did he lie? Why didn't he just say, yes, I was down to the kennels with them 5 minutes before?
Hold on. I mean, for the very reason I just outlined, let's say this is kind of cartel violence.
Prosecutors will tell you that pattern, access plus motive plus a demonstrable lie, is exactly what convicted him the first time, and unidentified DNA under a fingernail does not erase any of that. That is the strongest version of the state's case, and it deserves to be said plainly rather than waved away. But a full accounting also means asking the questions the first trial left unanswered. Why would someone use two different weapons in an attack described by investigators as fast and precise? Why was there no blood spatter connecting Alec Murdaugh directly to the shootings, something jurors were led to expect, but that never actually entered evidence? And why has no clear financial benefit to killing his wife and son ever been established, when the case against him was framed as a financial motive from the start? These are not conclusions.
And the blood spatter that is not, that's why we thought he did it and could prove it with that physical, objective evidence, and then we don't have that anymore. But so much of us heard about that early in the case, which we don't realize what that does to our brains, and we start having confirmation bias that, yeah, he had the blood spatter all over him, which you would have if you shot from that close. Oh, wait, no, he didn't. And that never actually came in at trial. Those are the types of things that when you step back, you see there are some issues with this case, absolutely.
And why two long arms? Again, that doesn't make any sense at all. Two?
And a perfect cleanup of the scene, which Dick Harpootlian mentioned that one of the law enforcement officers, I believe, or witnesses in the first case, after the trial was over, was like, he must have had help cleaning up the scene, because how could he have done that as just one person? And Harpootlian's like, that's very different than what his trial testimony was, that this was just Alec Murdaugh, and it's just one guy and there was nobody else there. And the two little people example that they gave based on the measurements and how this just, doesn't make sense, and everybody made a joke out of that. But what the defense, I think, was trying to argue is the math ain't mathin'. This is not making sense with how this is all set up.
They are open threads, and open threads are exactly what a second trial exists to pull.
I think that's a possible inference you can make from the evidence. I don't necessarily know that that's probable. It's definitely not anything anybody has proven. But I think that's definitely an inference that the jury can make, not an inference the prior jury made. But I do think that the depth and breadth of the financial crimes that came in, there's no way to look at that not affecting that prior jury, in my opinion. I do think it's a more difficult circumstantial case. I think Creighton Waters knows that. I think the prosecutors know it's a circumstantial case. They've talked about it a lot.
I want you to do something for me before the next hearing. Go back and look at the timeline of Alec Murdaugh's movements that night, the drive to his mother's house, the behavior described by witnesses there. Then set it next to the unidentified DNA profile and ask yourself whether these two pieces of the story are pointing at the same person or two different ones. Tell me what you find. This is the kind of detail an entire jury pool may end up weighing, and I want to know what you see in it before the professionals do. The forensic tools now available did not exist when this case was first investigated. They exist now, and a sample that has sat in storage since 2021 is finally going to be read the way modern science allows. What that sample reveals we do not yet know, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. No one does, not the judge, not the defense, not the prosecution, until the lab finishes its work.
Like in the next trial, or in just the upcoming litigation?
Everything leading up to it and during.
I think new evidence. I think we're going to see some headlines of new evidence. Now, what that new evidence actually is, I don't know. If I was the defense team, would I pitch new statements by witnesses as new evidence? Absolutely. Would I pitch new DNA results of, a known drug dealer was under Maggie Murdaugh's fingernails? If that's how the test comes, that's a new evidence headline. I definitely think, even the OnStar information that we got in the middle of trial number one, new evidence. I kind of think that new evidence is going to be a theme. If you're the defense and you want potential jurors to look at this case differently, new evidence is probably a good theme for you to show why is trial 2 going to be different.
But an answer is coming. The next pre-trial hearing lands August 14th and the trial itself is set for April 5th, 2027.
So there you have it. And I hope you can pop your popcorn for April 5th, 2027, because that's the tentative date for the start of the new trial. And I am going to be fascinated by the jury selection. I'm going to be all in the questions that they're going to be asking this potential jury pool. What do you know about this case? How much Netflix do you watch? And HBO and whatever else. I mean, listen, that story's been on every platform, right? But it's not just about whether you know about the case. If that were the fact, OJ would never have been able to be tried, right? Everybody knew OJ. It's not about whether you know about a case or you know about a person. It's whether you can be fair. And that's the specific way of questioning people and finding out whether you smell a rat in their answers. So That's the date of the trial, but if you can't wait till then, well, you're in luck because August 14th is the next pretrial hearing date, and we usually get little nuggets and snippets of stuff in those pretrial hearing dates, and for the most part, these are on camera. So there will be something to see, something to assess, something to look at, and then you may be able to jump ahead and know where they're going with the trial.
When that DNA result comes back, when a name attaches itself to that unidentified profile or when it doesn't, you are not going to hear about it secondhand. You are going to hear about it here, in full, the moment it happens, because this isn't a case we're covering from a distance. This is a case we're investigating alongside you, one hearing at a time, until there's finally a real answer. And remember, truth isn't just serious. It's drop-dead serious.